A castle forgotten by time. Yet every stone still breathes with secrets untold, and every shadow hides a truth darker than death itself. Legends call it haunted, but legends lie. What I'm about to reveal is no legend at all. It's real.
They say every legend has a beginning, but some legends are so dark, so twisted, that their very origins are shrouded in fear and silence. In the heart of what is now the Czech Republic, long before the stones of Hauska Castle were laid, there was a place the locals dared not enter, a place they only whispered about at night, their voices trembling as though speaking too loudly might awaken something waiting in the shadows. It was not a cave, it was not a tunnel, it was a hole. A vast, bottomless pit carved into the earth itself. The locals swore it had no end, no ground beneath its black mouth. They called it a gateway, not to another land, not to another country, but to hell itself. Travelers who wandered too close to the pit spoke of strange sounds rising from the depths, voices screaming, chains rattling, creatures shrieking in agony. Flocks of black-winged beasts were seen crawling out at dusk, creatures that resembled human forms twisted with talons and wings, things that did not belong in the world of the living. The villagers were terrified. Crops near the pit withered and died. Animals refused to go near it, pulling violently at their leashes whenever their masters tried to force them closer. Birds circled above it, but never landed. Even the bravest men felt their courage drain from their bones the moment they looked down into its endless darkness. The local rulers, fearing that the pit was truly cursed, devised a plan. They wanted to know if this hole really did lead to hell, and if anything could survive its depths. So they turned to the most disposable lives they had: prisoners. The deal was cruel. A prisoner, already sentenced to death, was offered a chance at freedom. All he had to do was agree to be lowered by rope into the black mouth of the pit. If he returned, he would walk free. Desperation breeds foolish courage, and one man accepted. The villagers gathered as soldiers tied a rope around his chest and lowered him into the hole. The crowd waited, the wind carrying a heavy silence as the rope sank deeper and deeper. At first, there was nothing, only darkness swallowing the man whole. But then, moments later, the silence was broken. Screams, piercing, maddening screams. The prisoner's voice echoed up from the pit, a sound so horrifying that even the soldiers trembled. He begged, shrieked, clawed at the rope to be pulled up. The men above hurriedly dragged him back, their faces pale as the prisoner's form emerged from the shadows. What they saw froze their blood. The man who had descended into the hole was no longer the same. He had only been gone for a matter of minutes, yet his face had aged decades. His hair had turned completely white. His eyes were wild, unblinking, filled with madness. His skin was wrinkled as though he had lived 50 years in the space of moments. He screamed uncontrollably, words broken, his body convulsing with terror. He died soon after, his mind shattered by whatever horrors he had witnessed below. From that day forward, the villagers refused to go near the pit. They swore the earth around it was cursed, that the hole was alive and hungry. Stories spread quickly of travelers vanishing when they strayed too close, of winged creatures attacking shepherds in the night, of whispers that called men toward the darkness like a siren song. The land itself seemed marked by evil. But instead of sealing it, instead of filling the pit with stone and earth, the rulers made a decision that would shape centuries of fear. They would build over it. They would cage it. They would trap hell beneath stone. And so began the construction of Hauska Castle.
The decision to build a castle over the pit was not made lightly. No king lived nearby. No nobleman needed protection. There was no strategic reason for it. No trade routes to defend. No rivers to guard. Hauska Castle was built in the middle of nowhere, far from towns, far from borders, far from anything of value, except for the pit. Historians for centuries have puzzled over this. Why build a fortress in the wilderness with no purpose, no throne room, not even proper defenses? The answer whispered by locals has always been the same. The castle was never meant to keep enemies out. It was meant to keep something in. Construction began in the 13th century. Stone by stone, the walls rose around the cursed hole. At its very heart, where the pit yawned wide, they built a chapel. Its altar stood directly above the opening, a sacred shield meant to seal the evil below. Holy images and crucifixes were carved into the stone. Monks were brought to bless it, chanting prayers day and night. But peace did not come. Workers complained of strange figures watching them from the shadows of the forest. Tools vanished, only to reappear twisted and broken. Some laborers swore they heard whispers beneath their feet as they laid the foundation, voices that mocked them, cursed them, promised vengeance. Several workers died mysteriously. One was found at the bottom of the construction site, with bones shattered, though no one had seen him fall. Another vanished entirely, his belongings left behind. The villagers claimed the pit had taken him, swallowed him whole. When the chapel was finally complete, the monks continued their prayers, but even they admitted the air felt wrong. Cold drafts swept through sealed rooms. Scratches appeared on the walls overnight, deep gouges as if claws had dragged across the stone. Shadows moved in the corners where no torchlight could reach. Over the years, stories grew darker. Locals avoided the castle, calling it the seat of the devil. Travelers reported grotesque figures at its windows at night, tall, thin silhouettes with wings folded at their sides. Some even claimed they saw fires burning inside when the halls were empty. But the most terrifying stories came from those who dared to enter after dark. They spoke of a pressure in the air, a weight that crushed their chest, as though the castle itself was alive and watching. In the chapel, they heard scratching beneath the floor, like something clawing to get out. Priests performed exorcisms. Nobles brought relics and holy texts. Nothing silenced the whispers. Nothing stopped the scratching. Hauska Castle stood, a fortress without purpose in the wilderness. But to those who lived nearby, its purpose was clear. It was a prison, not for men, not for kings, but for demons. And deep beneath its chapel floor, something waited. Something that had not forgotten the world above.
The castle stood for decades, silent and foreboding, but its stones could not silence the whispers. The people who lived in nearby villages continued to tell stories, stories that would pass from father to son, mother to daughter, until they became part of the land itself. They said that at night, the earth beneath the castle shook, ever so slightly, as though something enormous moved deep below. They spoke of screams that rose through the chapel floor, muffled but unmistakable, echoing through the empty halls like trapped souls begging to be freed. And then there were the sightings. Hunters claimed to see monstrous figures stalking the forest surrounding the castle. These were not wolves, not bears, not any creature known to nature. They described twisted forms, half human, half beast, grotesque silhouettes with elongated limbs and leathery wings that stretched out like the cloak of death itself. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, red like smoldering embers. Villagers who dared to travel after sunset often returned with tales of being followed. They heard footsteps behind them, though no one was there. They felt hot breath on the back of their necks, only to turn and see nothing but shadows. Some never returned at all. One of the most chilling stories told by the locals was of a young shepherd who brought his flock too close to the castle's outer wall. He was found days later, his body torn apart, his sheep scattered. Witnesses said the wounds on his flesh did not look like the work of wolves. They looked like claw marks, deep, jagged gouges that cut straight through bone. And yet, despite the fear, the castle remained. Nobles continued to send priests, monks, and scholars to the site, hoping to seal the evil. Some tried rituals, others chanted prayers, but those who stayed too long often fell ill, their bodies wasting away as if something unseen was feeding on them. One monk, who spent 3 nights alone in the chapel, was found wandering the forest days later, his mind broken. He muttered endlessly about black-winged creatures and faces in the stone. He never recovered, dying shortly after in madness. The people began to believe that the castle was not a fortress, but a magnet, that its very presence drew evil toward it. Travelers avoided it, maps rarely marked it, and whispers grew that the pit beneath the chapel was not simply a hole in the earth, but a wound, a tear in the fabric between this world and the next. The land itself resisted. Crops near the castle failed year after year. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches curling like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Birds refused to nest there, and even insects seemed to avoid its walls. Hauska Castle was alive, and whatever lived beneath it was restless. Centuries passed. Kings rose and fell. Empires shifted. Wars burned across Europe, but Hauska Castle remained, a silent giant looming over its cursed land. Then came the 20th century, and with it, a darkness unlike any before. During World War II, the German army swept across Europe, and with them came the shadow of the Nazis. They were not only conquerors of land, they were seekers of power. And power, they believed, could be found in the occult. Hauska Castle,
with its sinister reputation and whispered legends, caught their attention. The Nazis occupied the castle, sealing it off from the outside world. Guards patrolled its halls, but strange activities began within. Locals whispered that the soldiers were not there to defend it. They were there to study it. It is said the Nazis believed the pit beneath Huska was a portal, a doorway to another realm, a gateway not just to hell, but to hidden knowledge, to forces they could harness for war. Documents recovered after the war suggest that experiments were conducted inside the chapel, directly over the sealed pit. Witnesses claimed strange lights glowed from the windows at night, pulsing like lightning trapped inside the stone. Screams were heard, not of soldiers, but of something else, something inhuman. Some villagers swore they saw shadows moving behind the windows, tall, grotesque figures that were not men. What the Nazis truly did there remains a mystery. Many believe they were attempting to summon or control the creatures said to live below. Others think they were experimenting with time, death, or dimensions beyond human understanding. But then, suddenly, it ended. When the war turned against them, the Nazis abandoned the castle. They left in haste, burning records, destroying evidence of what they had done. What remained were only whispers and the cold, suffocating air that clung to the castle walls like a curse. Some say the soldiers unleashed something they could not control, that the reason they left was not retreat, but fear. When villagers dared to approach the castle again after the war, they found it eerily silent, yet in its halls they discovered scratches on the walls, symbols carved into the stone, and broken remains of strange equipment scattered like relics of forbidden science. But the most terrifying thing was the chapel. The altar that had stood for centuries, meant to seal the pit, was broken. Cracks spread across the floor, and from those cracks a chill rose that froze the blood of anyone who stepped inside. Whatever the Nazis had tried to do, whatever they had awakened, it was still there.
The war had ended. The Nazis were gone. Yet the castle still stood, silent and waiting. But the silence was not peace. It was the silence of a predator, crouched in the shadows, waiting for the next victim to step too close. In the years that followed, researchers, historians, and thrill-seekers were drawn to Hauska Castle. Each came with curiosity, most left with fear. Those who entered the chapel spoke of an overwhelming dread, a feeling so heavy it was as though the air itself was crushing their lungs. Electronic devices failed without explanation. Batteries drained in minutes. Cameras refused to capture the altar, as if the very stone rejected being seen. Some visitors swore they heard scratching beneath the chapel floor. Others heard whispers, not one voice, but many, whispering in languages no one could understand. A few claimed the whispers called their name. One investigator, writing in the 1970s, described standing near the altar when the floor beneath his feet suddenly grew warm, as though a fire raged below. Then a foul stench rose through the cracks, sulfur and decay. He fled the castle that night and never returned. Modern accounts are no less chilling. Shadows move where there should be none. Black figures are seen watching from the castle windows, even when the rooms are empty. Guests have woken in the night to find scratches on their arms, fresh and bleeding, though no one touched them.
Locals still avoid the castle after dark. Some refuse to speak its name at all. For them, the legends are not stories, they are warnings. And then there are the creatures. Hikers in the surrounding forests have reported grotesque figures darting between the trees. Tall, thin, winged shapes, their movements unnatural, jerking like broken marionettes. One group claimed to hear flapping wings above them, only to look up and see nothing but darkness. Another described glowing eyes watching from the tree line, following them for miles until they ran. No one dares to explore the pit itself. The chapel floor remains cracked, the altar broken. The earth beneath it feels hollow, as though something enormous stirs beneath the surface. Scientists who studied the geology of the land reported anomalies, readings that defy explanation, suggesting a void, a vast emptiness beneath the castle. But the villagers already knew. They always knew. Hauska Castle is not just a ruin. It is a seal, a prison. And like all prisons, what lies inside dreams of freedom. Some say the pit is older than the castle, older than the village, older than the land itself, that it is not natural, but a wound, a tear in reality where something unspeakable leaks into our world. The whispers continue, the scratching never stops. And to this day, those who stand in the chapel at night swear they can feel the earth breathe.
So, what is Hauska Castle really? A fortress with no purpose? A legend born of fear? Or a true gateway? A hole in the earth leading straight to hell itself? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. When you stand in the chapel above the pit, when you hear the whispers in the silence, when you feel the ground trembling beneath your feet, you understand why the villagers still say, "The castle does not protect us from the world outside. It protects the world outside from what waits below."